When Mrs. Netterfield entered the room, all eyes were drawn to her. She was shuffling, disheveled, and forlorn, the very embodiment of someone who had given up on life. And she was blaming the architect for her sorry state. It was going to be a steep uphill battle for us to prove otherwise, and failure to do so would be costly. Welcome to The Claims-Free Architect, the podcast that helps architects understand risk and protect themselves and their practice from claims by learning crucial lessons from our archive of over 6,000 past insurance claims. The Claims-Free Architect is produced by Pro-Demnity Insurance Company, whose cause is to champion architects' wise, efficient, and effective management of risk and build thriving practices. In a lavish hotel suite where a marble threshold trips the host, a painful fall sparks a $1 million claim. Can an architect be liable despite code compliance? Learn why safety is more important than style, how well-crafted details can help your defense, and why juries favor sympathy. Help your colleagues protect your firm from allegations of errors, omissions, or negligence that may arise from the practice of architecture by sharing the wisdom from our stories. All you have to do is share this episode with one or more colleagues and let them know they can subscribe to our feed in their favorite podcast app. Designed by award-winning Kingston architect Reginald Astergall, the Colburn Royal Kensington Hotel was simply one of the finest hotels in Eastern Ontario, and the penthouse suites were la crème de la crème, boasting spacious rooms with luxurious appointments, expensive materials, and impeccable detailing. The kitchen floors, for example, were finished with porcelain tiles from Spain. The living dining area was graced with merino carpets imported from New Zealand. The threshold between the two floor surfaces was highlighted by a strip of solid travertine, which was both elegant and functional, since it separated and protected the carpeting from the washable tile floor. Unfortunately, and entirely unintentionally, it made the entry to the kitchen a potential safety hazard. We call this story Making an Entrance. Shortly after the hotel opened, Mrs. Edwina Netterfield, a successful real estate broker in the Kingston area, had rented one of the penthouse suites to celebrate a lucrative closing. She had invited a dozen of her colleagues to join the celebration. Before the arrival of her caterers, she helped herself to a non-alcoholic beverage from the Thermidor fridge and set it on the coffee table. As she went back to the kitchen to retrieve a few ice cubes, her foot caught on the marble threshold. So, instead of making a smooth, confident entry into the kitchen, as might befit a successful businesswoman, she went headfirst, through the air, along the tile floor, and straight into the base of the solid birch cabinets. This changed her evening plans dramatically. An ambulance rushed Mrs. Netterfield to the emergency room, where she was examined and found to have sustained no serious physical injury, no broken bones, sprained joints, or torn ligaments, and released. As the doctor explained to her, the injuries she had sustained were of the soft tissue kind, capable of causing much pain and suffering, but unquantifiable and undetectable by medical instruments. Perhaps the bigger injury was to Mrs. Netterfield's pride. She had to cancel her party. And while her colleagues were openly sympathetic about her unfortunate mishap, she could only imagine what they were saying behind her back about her clumsiness and the obvious dark humor they must have shared in imagining her flying like an inept trapeze artist directly into the kitchen cabinets. Her only recourse was to regain her pride by suing the hotel and the architect whose thoughtless design had caused her anguish. In her suit, Mrs. Netterfield was seeking $3 million in compensation for pain and suffering, as well as for financial loss, actual and potential, since the accident had left her unable to work at all. Then, of course, there was reputational damage, since her social activities and public appearances had now come to an undignified end. She rarely left her home anymore, and then only with the help of friends and family. In short, her life had been ruined. On receipt of the claim, Pro-Demnity assumed that it was just another trip-and-fall case, in which an individual who has suffered a possibly minor injury wishes to extract a major payout from some well-insured defendants, regardless of attributable blame. We knew that if this case went to court, there was a good chance that the appearance of pain and suffering, severe, modest, or entirely simulated, would work in the plaintiff's favor in front of a jury. Trial was to be avoided. Mediation took place in a meeting room rented for the day from the school board. Defenses had been submitted by the hotel owners, represented by their property insurer and legal counsel, and by Pro-Demnity for the architect. The mediator was an experienced senior lawyer whose specialty appeared to be maintaining a light-hearted atmosphere. This was a godsend, since the plaintiff's counsel, Jonathan Haviland, a young and humorless member of a small firm that specialized in personal injury cases, seemed hell-bent on creating an aura of gloom. After the mediator delivered the usual preamble, reminding all parties of the rules of conduct, etc., etc., Haviland took the floor and launched into Mrs. Netterfield's sorry tale of the disastrous fall and its dire consequences. To support his case, he produced a quantity of documents attesting to his client's post-traumatic issues and, to add to the theatrics, he produced Mrs. Netterfield herself. All eyes turned as the side door clicked and slowly opened. After several seconds of dramatic pause, the frail figure of Mrs. Netterfield hesitantly shuffled into the room, encumbered by the largest neck brace that any of us had ever seen. With her counsel clutching her arm, she made her way, slowly and precariously, to her seat. She was an extremely sorry sight, the very personification of the loss of enjoyment of life. In a barely audible voice, Mrs. Netterfield recounted her impressions of her solo flight across the length of the penthouse kitchen. In order to hear her, we were forced to gather around her chair. We were transfixed. It was hard to know whether this performance was genuine or staged for our benefit. Had she been coached by her lawyer, or had she written this scene all by herself? Even her drab clothing, her slightly unkempt hair, and exaggerated makeup appeared to have been designed to express despair. But it had been nearly 3 years since the accident. Had she lived every one of those 1,000 days in this dreadful state? If she had, then she'd certainly deserved our sympathy, but not necessarily $3 million in compensation. Our task was to get to the bottom of this and uncover the facts, if there were any to be uncovered. So, when she had finished her story, Pro-Demnity counsel gently asked why the injury to her shoulder and neck caused her to whisper, since there was no medical indication of throat or mouth damage, and the accident had happened 3 years ago. She replied that she was just too weak to speak above a whisper. Our legal counsel continued. Addressing the room, she pointed out that, sympathetic as we were to the pain Mrs. Netterfield appeared to be enduring, the insurance available was not a compensation fund, and that for any damages to be payable, there had to be some proven negligence on the part of the defendants. The facts of the case indicated that no blame could be assigned to the architect. We were confident that, should the matter go to court, we could present expert opinions to verify that the architect's specifications and details met the standards of the time. The marble thresholds indicated on the drawings were within code requirements, and there were literally thousands of buildings in Ontario with identical details. There would be no damage payments. Our counsel further pointed out that doctors had found no physical damage, only unquantifiable soft tissue damage, which didn't really explain why Mrs. Netterfield was still unable to function after 3 years. Counsel didn't mention what we all knew, that soft tissue damage had been recognized in innumerable judicial decisions as the cause of much suffering. Mrs. Netterfield's appearance said all that needed to be said. Medical opinion was irrelevant. The Property Insurers' Council, representing the hotel's interests, declined to add anything, so we defendants retired to an adjacent office, designated as the caucus room. There, during an intense discussion, our certainty of innocence gradually evaporated. To begin with, the thresholds were not exactly according to code, because they weren't chamfered. This chamfering, or beveling, would have softened the transition between the floor surfaces and might have prevented Mrs. Netterfield's mishap. The architect countered that the chamfering was a handicap requirement intended to accommodate wheelchair access, and this was not a wheelchair accident, but still, it was a problem. Then, the building owner had removed all the marble thresholds within weeks of the accident, so there was no way to confirm the height and configuration of this particular threshold. The co-defendant's counsel suggested that this was only a precaution to prevent any possible further incidents, but it may still have suggested that the hotel had identified a wrong and was trying to right it. The final letdown was the admission by the property insurer that they had put a tail on Mrs. Netterfield, as insurance companies sometimes do, to find gaps in the claimant's story. During the 3 years of admittedly intermittent observation, Mrs. Netterfield had not worked or taken vacations. She only ventured from her home to attend church or occasionally to meet friends. She was always driven by one of her children who helped her to the car, plodding and unsteady, neck brace and all. She had not been observed doing anything that might diminish her credibility, and jury trial was approaching. Mrs. Netterfield was an upstanding member of the community, a mother, a grandmother, and a dedicated churchgoer. If her performance wasn't genuine, it was certainly Oscar-worthy, and any jury would give her the benefit of the doubt. We, the insurers, would be given no such benefit. We decided among ourselves to try and manage the impending loss as best we could. Taking a strictly economic approach, we asked ourselves, what had she spent on her lawyer and medical reports? We decided $150,000 would cover this. We had figured that at $150,000 a year, she had lost $450,000 in gross wages, although with the unemployment insurance and other benefits, she had actually lost less. We set our sights at $500,000 max and started the bargaining at $400,000. After 2 hours of toing and froing, we settled at $450,000, half to be paid by Pro-Demnity, the other half by the hotel's insurer. No one was truly happy with this outcome except the mediator, who proudly announced that the result was wonderful and represented the best possible outcome for all parties. He was probably right. As a postscript, personal injury claims against architects in Canada at least, are much more common today and much more costly than they were a few decades ago. As soon as a personal injury lawyer gets involved, an expert is hired, photos are taken, and the accident scene is measured to the millimeter. Our defense is always that building construction is very different from watchmaking. On a stairway, for example, it's rare for every tread and riser to be perfect, or for floors and sidewalks to be dead level. Minor variations are inevitable, perfectly acceptable, and are even recognized in building codes. Usually, common sense prevails, and extravagant, frivolous, or opportunistic claims are dismissed with prejudice. But in personal injury cases, human sympathy is a more powerful force than any argument based on facts and figures. A hapless victim, as the plaintiff hopes to be perceived, must be compensated by the victimizers. And thanks to the Negligence Act, the relative degree of responsibility among the defendants is immaterial. If fault can be shown to exist, then compensation must come from whoever has the ability to pay. 1% of liability may translate to 100% of liability attributed to the available deep pocket. Further to that, many injuries are of the soft tissue variety, unquantifiable and undiscoverable using medical technology. Fatigue, chronic pain, depression, etc. are detectable, but not always clinically provable, or assignable to a distinct proximate cause. And zest for life may be lost for any number of reasons. There are always medical practitioners willing to back the plaintiff's claim, and an equal number of defense doctors prepared to confirm the exact opposite. It's virtually impossible for an architect to avoid every circumstance that might give rise to a personal injury claim, so the need for adequate professional liability insurance is obvious. But in areas, even tiny ones, where personal safety is involved, special care needs to be taken. From stories such as this one, lessons may be learned. Lesson number 1. Marble thresholds at kitchen and bathroom entrances are common and extremely useful for identifying changes in floor finishes or keeping water in spaces intended to be wet. They are more durable than metal strips, and usually just as safe, provided that their shape or height above adjacent materials doesn't present a tripping hazard. Lesson number 2. Trust your legal team. In a civil case, the burden of proof always lies with the plaintiff, but in a personal injury case, sympathy for the plaintiff may invert this rule, shifting that burden to the defendant. After all, it's much easier to commiserate with a distraught plaintiff than with a self-assured, well-heeled professional or their well-funded insurer. Any trial or mediation containing so many unknowns and unknowables is a gamble, but the plaintiff faces as many uncertainties as the defendants, which is why, with patience, wisdom, and adequate preparation, we can usually settle at a fraction of the claimed amount. Lesson number 3. Personal injury claims are tort claims. There is no way to contract out of this type of exposure. Recognizing the growth in this type of claim, the increasing amounts of damages being sought, and the lack of connection between the risk and fees or construction value, architects are encouraged to consider purchasing higher than the mandatory minimum limits required under the Architects Act. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Claims-Free Architect. We hope it was instructive and entertaining, and that it might help you be proactive in managing liability risks in your architectural practice. In this episode, we've learned the following. Enhanced safety features like chamfered thresholds are your friend. Document safety reviews to reduce liability. Trust legal teams to manage injury claims. Remember that every jurisdiction and every case is different. Always refer to the laws and regulations governing your local jurisdiction and consult legal, architectural, and insurance professionals about the unique circumstances of your own case. For more architectural risk awareness tips and new podcast announcements, sign up for our newsletter at Pro-Demnity.com. If you liked this story, follow the Claims-Free Architect in your favorite podcast app. The original Pro-Demnity stories were written by David Croft and have been adapted for audio by Gordon Grice. The stories are performed by Liam Gadsby and produced by Revelator Studio, Toronto. The publisher and executive producer of the written stories and audio episodes is Pro-Demnity Insurance Company, Toronto. For more information, including the full legal disclaimer, visit Pro-Demnity.com.